In 2013, Edward Snowden became a globally famous whistleblower after leaking highly classified information from the National Security Agency, the NSA. Since then, he has detailed several surveillance programs that were designed to spy on terrorist organizations, foreign businesses, and government entities, along with ordinary citizens in various countries. However, that was just the tip of the iceberg, a mosaic of recently used or still active projects that followed their predecessors. In fact, such efforts had been ongoing for a full century since World War I, which I will explain in this video. Our story began in 1917 when Herbert Osborne Yardley, a former employee of the State Department and a cryptography enthusiast, took over Section 8 of Military Intelligence, MI8. He established a cipher section and participated in the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, trying to secure American communications and at the same time decipher messages of their allies. After the war, MI8 became a permanent organization in New York, operating a commercial code business as a cover, while its Black Chamber focused on foreign ciphers. Yardley solved the Japanese code, which became useful at the Washington Naval Conference, but the US was already returning to the pre-war norm, dismantling censorship, so a new form of cooperation was needed to continue to eavesdrop. Even though it was illegal, the major telegraph companies were convinced to cooperate, so all the important telegrams were copied and deciphered to learn their contents, but they also learned that the British were eavesdropping on all cable messages using their vast underwater cable network. In return, the Black Chamber solved coded messages from almost 20 countries, from Argentina and France to the Soviet Union. However, due to the Radio Act of 1927, which closed the previous loopholes, the cable companies started supplying less material, so interest turned to intercept stations and listening posts to monitor radio traffic. The main target was Japan, but the projects failed due to technical and bureaucratic issues, so there was a lack of new information. Justifying the operation became more difficult. In 1929, Herbert Hoover became president and appointed Henry L. Stimson Secretary of State. The Black Chamber was closed down as the new administration did not see the need for such activities. Yardley then published a book, The American Black Chamber, about his activities, which became a hit, while government officials denied everything and eventually confiscated the manuscript of his second book. He was now out, his Black Chamber was gone, but while Stimson famously stated that gentlemen did not read each other's mail, the operation was simply transferred from military intelligence to the Signal Corps to centralize all activities and prepare for the next war. The new organization was named Signal Intelligence Service in April 1930. Its head was William F. Friedman, who had solved the messages for the government in 1916, even before Yardley got started at MI8. They had to revise Army codes, intercept enemy radio and wire traffic, locate enemy radio stations, and solve intercepted enemy code. A training school was set up, then an experimental intercept station was built near Washington, D.C., even though interception itself was still illegal. Japan was still the main target, but by the late 1930s, more stations were added, listening to traffic between Tokyo, Rome, and Berlin. They started with 7 experts, but by the time of the attack on Pearl Harbor, they had more than 300, and by the war's end, they had over 10,000 people. In the meantime, Friedman was replaced so that he could focus on the technology itself, while a rivalry between the Army and the Navy developed. The Navy had its own service with 700 people and several stations in the late 1930s, but it was the SIS that broke the Japanese diplomatic code, and then the more advanced Purple Machine. As the threat of war grew, the two services made a compromise. The Navy's OP-20G would focus on Japanese naval codes, while the SIS could work on any other messages. Thanks to their efforts, they knew hours before the actual attack that Japan was going to break off negotiations, but informing the higher-ups and making the necessary decisions took a long time, so the warning reached Hawaii during the attack. To avoid similar failures, SIS was expanded and reorganized, then renamed several times. A reports section was added, Japanese Army codes were also broken, then G2, Army Intelligence, took control of the organization, which was again renamed, this time to Army Security Agency. Thanks to their efforts, the Japanese Navy was intercepted at Midway, soft spots could be located, along with German U-boats. After the war, the Army-Navy rivalry continued, although a new committee was established for improved coordination. They were joined by the State Department, the FBI, the Central Intelligence Group, and the Air Force, so by 1948, these 6 agencies were included. Virtually all communications entering and leaving the United States could be monitored, as long as they could be connected to certain broad subject areas, which once again went against the Communications Act of 1934. Despite repeated reorganizations, the intelligence community remained fragmented, so in 1949, the Armed Forces Security Agency was created in total secrecy. It was to coordinate the cryptologic efforts of the CIA, the FBI, the State Department, and the three branches of the military, but it failed to prepare and react to the Korean War, so in November 1952, it was replaced with the National Security Agency, the NSA, whose existence remained a secret for decades. It would become the largest espionage factory the world has ever seen, with its headquarters in Fort Meade, Maryland, which was completed in 1957. It grew quickly. By 1969, there were 95,000 people in the cryptology program before the cutbacks. They immediately started using computers, and by the 70s, huge IBM mainframes provided the necessary horsepower, followed by the Cray 1 and other more advanced supercomputers. In the 1980s, a worldwide computer network was planned, including foreign partners like the British GCHQ. In the 1950s and 60s, American planes frequently approached and penetrated Soviet airspace. Several of them were shot down, but in most cases, neither side mentioned the incident. Soon, U-2 spy planes and brand-new spy satellites joined them, but listening posts were also set up in various countries, from Japan to Turkey and Germany, whose own messages were being intercepted, as not even allies were to be trusted. However, the primary target was the Soviet Union, where military bases, rocket testing sites, possible launches, and various other targets were being monitored. Tapping undersea cables was problematic, so the cable heads were targeted instead, where the signals were converted to microwaves. The growing number of communication satellites also made it easier to eavesdrop on domestic communications, although it is likely that at first, only diplomatic traffic was monitored in this way. International events sometimes forced the SIGINT, Signals Intelligence, community to remove its personnel from certain countries. They briefly left Turkey in 1975 when it invaded Cyprus, and they had to exit Iran after its 1979 revolution, although interestingly, a deal was struck with China a year later regarding the construction of a new listening post in remote Xinjiang. Inflation was an issue as well, but a new generation of satellites was nonetheless launched by the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office, for which the NSA provided its traditional SIGINT services. The launch of the Internet in the 1990s made it even easier to eavesdrop on domestic and foreign communications, especially as the NSA had delayed the introduction of encryption standards like the DES by almost a decade. It took more than 20 years of constant fighting with the authorities to make cryptography available to the public, but that did not prevent government agencies from listening on digital traffic that was becoming global. Cell phones and smartphones were soon added to the collection, The NSA duly prepared its own set of tools to break into these devices, as Edward Snowden illustrated back in 2013. Today, the USA and its 4 partners in the Five Eyes Alliance continue to listen to practically everything and everybody. Officially, this is to prevent major terrorist attacks and ensure national security, but according to some experts, up to 90% of such activities can be categorized as industrial espionage. It seems China is not the only major power that engages in this. This concludes my brief summary on the history of American surveillance efforts. Of course, a lot more could be said, but it will only happen in future videos. Thank you for watching. See you next time.